Start recording. Okay, now we're recording, and that's recording really loud. Let me turn that down. Test, 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 test. Okay, it's working. All right, so we have a handful of things to chat about today. One is something like a slight change in plans. I was going to cover the 2D face rig process today. I'm torn about how detailed you want to go with this. So I have a process for it, but I'll be honest, it's maybe a little more deep than what you all may be needing. And so there's still a couple little hiccups in it. I have a couple of video links I can share with you that are other people's 2D face rig techniques that work pretty well. But it means that your 2D texture is going to be on a flat surface, and some of you may have it on something that's not just a flat color, right? And so the method I was doing was to layer these, and so we'll get into that. I think I can have it have a smoother tutorial for it or a walkthrough for it by next class period. So today I'm going to put that off, and today is more of the animation tips and tricks day. I actually think it's a really significant set of concepts we're going to be talking about today. So I would advise you to kind of put whatever it is you're working on your screen on pause and kind of pay attention. I'm going to be asking questions. I recognize like bouncing back and forth. If you can do that, that's cool. But there's a lot of handy concepts we're going to be looking at today. So first things first, looking at our schedule, where we're at right now is right here, the 22nd. Right, we have these 2 weeks of pretty much just open work time and some sort of pickup lecture time. I think I'm going to lighting and rendering and effects. We'll talk about that. That might work better for me to just give you all some links to some stuff that will help and give you more in-class work time, so I can do more hands-on stuff with you one at a time. So what I do want to talk about today, though, is the next thing that's due, which is our milestone 4 check-in. If we look at the requirements for that, milestone 2, 3, 4, it's the blocking pass of all shots edited together in order. Okay, so basically this is your full film in blocking. How many of you have done a layout pass for your full film? That's cool. That means the blocking pass is going to be way easier for you, because that means all you really have to do is start making stuff move now, right? Start getting your poses in there. I strongly encourage you to start your layout pass if you haven't already. Using that referencing method we talked about before, it's going to be way easier than starting each shot individually, because you're going to have to go back and redo stuff a lot that way. Now, looking at that, from our milestone 4, we're just a little over a week away from there being pretty much the end of the production process, which means all of your animation should be just about finished. I realize there's still going to be a lot of cleanup animation there, but you should at least have a spline pass of everything at that point. And that way we just have a few weeks left for rendering and pulling everything together as a final piece. Who still needs to record audio? Anybody? All right, y'all really need to get on that, because I think you're going to need that before you can get your blocking pass done. So, so if you need to meet with me sometime here this week to record audio, if you're needing help finding people for audio, whatever, I can help you with all that. So, I just wanted to chat about those things, kind of keep you in mind where we're at. We are past the halfway point now, right? We are on the decline toward the end, right? And if you look at this, we're less than a month away. We're like 3 weeks away, almost 4 weeks away from being like animation complete. How many of you feel like you're a little behind schedule on that? All right. So we can pull this together. Like this is kind of the proverbial light kick to the butt. You know, kind of make sure you're moving forward. And if there's something you've been kind of kicking your feet at for a while here, maybe it's time to figure out a simpler solution to that and move on. So, okay. So what today is about is we spend most of our time inside of Maya animating with keyframes in that way that I've been talking to you about it since you got here, right? You need something to move in a certain way, you grab it, you set some keyframes, and you make it move that way, right? You force it into that. So it's sort of the brute force way of animating things. And 90% of the time, that is how I animate. Like, that's how I'm getting stuff done. But just like everything else that we have, everything else that we do here in digital media, each of these processes, each of these challenges is a is like a problem to be solved, right? Like you have some problem to solve, some challenge, and you have to decide which tools to use to do that. So in most cases where you're using keyframes, but let's just talk about problem solving. So I'm going to ask you all kind of at random here. Ryan, okay, I want a glass of milk. How would you go about getting me a glass of milk? Because I'm a demanding baby. Like I'm like milk, milk, milk. Give me a glass of milk. How would you go about getting a glass of milk from me right now?
Well, we want to figure out where to get the glass of milk from.
So where would that be for you?
Probably the gas station. That's where I usually get one.
The gas station. So like the one over here, like the Shell, or the one?
The BP.
The BP. All right. Okay. So Ethan, how would you give me milk?
Yeah, well, these are the gas stations, so I guess I'll do it at the marketplace. Filling it up.
So the one in the help center?
Yeah.
Oh, so like they have like the little market, like they have the thing, right? You just bring your own like jug, like a gas tank, and just fill it up.
I don't think I could bring my own. I could sneak a cup out for it.
Oh, that'd be nice. As you're carrying it back over, just sort of put your hand over the top, you know, so the leaves don't fall in it and stuff. So, no? You can't drink my milk. Brandon.
I would go to Kroger or Fresh Market or Food City and buy you an entire gallon of milk.
Gallon of milk. Brandon's sucking up. He's like, have a gallon of milk. Not just a cup. You can fill that cup up multiple times. Anybody have any other options?
Well, there's a tree house nearby, that's closer to the marketplace. They have Starbucks, so I'm sure they have milk. And they have the garage.
Oh yeah, there's I think you can buy little containers of milk in Subway. Is it Subway open?
We're in Tennessee, we just find the nearest cow.
Ah, we'll come back to the cow. So, Tony,
That's why I was
I eat cow so you can have fresh milk every day.
oh, there we go. Buy a cow, so I have fresh milk. So recognize that, like, we all kind of laugh at the cow joke, right? But where does milk come from? Goats. I do love some goat cheese. So we have all these solutions, and I want you to recognize that you solve problems like this all the time, right? If you need batteries for your remote, for your TV, you're not like, all hope is lost, whatever will I do, right? You have strategic problem-solving skills that allowed you to get to adulthood that help you solve problems, right? And I use a glass of milk as an example, but it can be with anything, right? And you make those decisions, like these problem-solving decisions, based off of a lot of different things. There's a reason milk wasn't, or buying a cow or finding a cow and milking it was not the first option. And I'm guessing like Andrew was kind of running out of options because everybody already taken Kroger and was probably saying that kind of as a joke, but everybody kind of laughed at that one. But when you think of milk, milk comes from a cow, right? Why is that not your first solution?
Because it's not very good.
Huh?
It's not like Well, it's not our first go-to solution.
Yeah.
It's not our
It's not the cheapest.
It's not the cheapest.
It's not
It's
practical.
yeah, it's not practical. It's not the most common, right? It's definitely not the easiest. I got kicked by a cow a couple months ago. Like cows are not like as docile and easy to milk as you might think. Huh? Oh yeah. Oh, I love cows actually. I have cow sculptures and books about cows. Cows are awesome. I actually took a really cool picture of a cow this weekend because it got really close. Look at his nose. The cow nose. He got really close, and I was like, snap. Cows stink. These are all beef cattle, though. You can't milk any of those. So.
Not with that attitude.
No. So we make these problem-solving decisions based off of efficiency, based off of ease of use, based off what's going to give us the best solution, right? And the easy, like for you all, when I asked about milk, you thought, what is the most simple way I can get Greg to leave me alone and get him a glass of milk, right? So I want you to recognize that our knee-jerk reaction to some of the problems that you are posed with in Maya may not be the simplest solution. If I tell you I need a glass of milk in Maya, a lot of you say, oh, cool, I'll just simulate that in Bifrost. And I'm like, that is like going to the cow, right? Like that is like you heard that milk comes from a cow, so that's the only way to get it, right? That's not the only way to get it. Like Bifrost is what you go to if you need to pour a lot of liquid out into another container. Right? If you just need a glass of milk sitting on the table, you just make a cylinder and you texture it like milk, right? Like you maybe put some ripples in it, or maybe use balls. Like so, we kind of understand that with other parts of this. I wanted to sort of address this with animation, like some ways of solving some animation problems. Right? Some of this stuff just sort of falls to the crack. Actually, I forgot to pass the attendance around. Let me go and pass that around now. Some of this stuff just falls to the crack in terms of other classes. And so I want you to think of some of these animation tools as just problem-solving techniques, right? So let's start with a solar system. I'm going to go to my top view here, and I'm going to create a sphere and sort of move this out to here, and we're going to call this little guy Moon. I'm also going to duplicate that. We'll make a little bit of a bigger one. We'll call this guy Earth, and Control D. Move this back to 0. And we'll call this Sun. All right. Huh? Uh-huh. And the sun orbits the Earth, right?
Yeah.
So we, despite my lack of proportions, correct proportions here, let's say what I needed was I needed this moon to orbit the Earth, okay? So with keyframes, right now if I grab this object, you would think that the method in which you would do that is just start hitting S, right? Like we go out here, I hit S on that frame, I'm gonna go ahead and turn on auto key, go out a little bit more, maybe I move it over to here, and so now it goes through the Earth, so about halfway through there, maybe here, right? I needed to get, oh, now I've messed that up. Get it back to here. So we're getting a little bit of a path around here. I needed to get back to its origin point, so I can take it to 30, right? And so I have to take it back down through the center of the Earth again, something like this. Okay, so I kind of have this orbit. It's a messy animation, right? Playback speed, real time. What's the smarter way of doing that? So look at that. Like, I'm trying to get an arc out of a bunch of lines, right? The smarter way of doing this is actually just changing my pivot point, right? So I can delete all of these keyframes here. Delete, right? And I can go back to this, hit insert, or D. D does the same thing, right? And I can change my pivot point to more of the center of this earth, right? And now when I animate this, it just goes in an arc around here, right? So most of you probably already kind of assumed that, right? Let's say I still wanted to keep a little bit of local motion on my earth, or my moon. I still wanted my moon to be able to spin, even though it doesn't actually work that way. The moon actually always sort of stays in the same orientation to Earth. It's, what is that called? It's not tidally locked. Anyway, but let's say this is a different planet's moon and I wanted it to be able to spin as it's rotating around. I could always just start using groups, right? So I can grab my moon, I can group it to itself, Control G, and now it's like a container that I can animate. And you'll see that my container is over here, but if I change the pivot point of my moon group over to the center of this Earth, right? And I can sort of snap it even to the exact center. If I go to 4 here and I hold down V, what's V do? So it snaps to, yeah, to any point. So usually vertices. So I can snap to that center vertex and go back to E. And now if I just animate this moon group, it's going to go in a circle, and I still have the ability to sort of change this object's location relatively to that, right? Redo one more. Sorry. Okay, so let's go ahead and set the 2 keyframes we need on this. So I'm going to hit S. I'm going to go forward maybe 30 frames. I'm going to go all the way around 360 degrees, right? 360. There we go. We have my 2 keyframes. And if I hit play on this, the thing you'll notice is it plays one time, but it also eases in and out at the beginning and the end of that, right? So let's just open up our graph editor so we can look at this. Animation. Oh, thank you. Anybody else need the attendance sheet? Make it around everybody.
I was here last time, but I guess I didn't fill it out on accident.
Yeah, did you go ahead and
Yeah, I just went ahead.
I remember you did. So to get that ease in and out, ease in and ease out of there, ease in and ease out. It's this right here, right? Like in my curve, we can see it eases in and out. So I can easily just grab those and set that to linear, right? But if I wanted this to continue to rotate, right? My problem is, like, I would have to start doing math, and I hate math, right? Like, I just want this to continue to orbit forever, right? And if we think about that, like, that's kind of within practical limitations. That's how the moon actually works. It's been orbiting the planet for a long time, maybe not for infinity, but for a long time. And it's going to hopefully continue orbiting for a long time, because if it doesn't, we're in trouble. So really, I just want this 360-degree loop to just continue happening, right? So if I want to see Maya, I gave Maya 2 instructions. I said, be here on frame 1, be here on frame 30, right? And I'm giving Maya orders, but once I stop giving Maya orders, it just stops, right? Really, and it doesn't snap back to its original position. It stays at the last place I put it. And it will, in theory, stay there for infinity. If I set my time slider to go out to 1 quadrillion, I'm making up numbers now, it's never going to get another piece of input from me. It's just going to keep going flat like that, right? So we can see that. If I go to View and look at infinity, you'll see that my rotate Y on that group is just flat there, right? You can kind of see that green line that goes out forever before and after that. I didn't give it any instructions before, I didn't give it any instructions after, so it just stays constant at whatever keyframes I gave it, right? I can change that. I can grab this curve, I'm only on this curve right now, right? And if I go to curves here, we have this pre-infinity and post-infinity. So if I set this to cycle, and you'll see right now it's actually set to constant. If I set this to cycle, watch what happens. Now, after frame 30, the last keyframe I set, it snaps back down and just goes from 0 to 365 again. So it's really just looping over and over from 0 to 365, which looks right, but actually isn't exactly right, because if I wasn't doing a full 360 degree rotation, it would be stopping a little short and jumping. So what I'm going to do instead is under these curves and post infinity, I'm going to say cycle with offset. Now watch what happens to that curve now. It just continues to grow forever upward, right? Forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And in fact, if I were to go out here, way out here to frame 32,000, you'll see that that number is still continuing to climb. It's at now 401,648, right? That's what my value of rotate Y is. It just continues to go up forever, right? So this is something you can use for all sorts of different stuff. Let's say you're doing a character running, and we kind of saw this earlier in principles. We had our character do a walk cycle. We set it to cycle infinity with offset. Cycle with offset on our infinity. And the character would, in theory, just keep walking forward forever, right? So this is what we have now, is that if I hit play, it's going to just cycle like this forever, right? So let's say that we also wanted, though, our Earth to be orbiting our sun, right? So this is where we can sort of start coming up with some tricks with this. So really that means I need my Earth and my Moon group to be circling, or to be orbiting this piece, right? And so if I just hit Control G again, I can call this Earth group, right? I can do the same thing. Let's make this over 300 instead of 200. It automatically puts my pivot point in the right spot, so I'm going to hit S to set my keyframe. Go out here to frame 300, 360, and you'll see we now have this pivot all the way around, right? Now I got an ease in and ease out at the beginning, so I'm going to go in here, set all of this to linear. And again, I could set this to cycle with offset, and we would just have this infinitely spinning globe, right? So most of you are probably like, you're like, yeah, I get that, Greg, I understand. The thing I really want to impress upon you, though, is how beneficial this is in getting complex arcs, right? If I go to visualize, create editable motion trail, that's the arc my moon is making right now. So you can see now, like, how much easier that was to get a really complex and actually very controlled animation, just by sort of thinking through how I'm going to do that, right? Okay, let's try something a little more challenging. Maybe this isn't more challenging, this is just different. Let's just try this instead. So, File, New Scene, don't save. I'm going to go ahead and create a cylinder and put myself some divisions in there. Huh? Glass of milk. It's milk time, y'all.
Please don't say that.
Yeah, that felt weird. So there we go. So we have this poll. Let's say your assignment from your animation director was, we have this sphere, I want this sphere to spiral up this pole, okay? And that's all they said. They're like, oh, okay, so you go back to your desk, right? Obviously, like, I'm not gonna show you that setting keyframes is not the easy way to do that. I can very easily just go in here, change my pivot point again. I hold down X, snap that to the center, rotate, do the same thing we just did, right? Which is let's do like 40 frames. Let's try that. Do 365 degrees on the Y. I keep saying 365. It's 360. So now we have this full spiral, right? And just as a reminder, set this to linear. And then I can go to curves, post infinity, cycle with offset. If you want to be able to see that, we can turn on infinity, right? So now what's going to happen is this is just going to spin around this pole for infinity, right? But I want it to climb the pole. So what else do I need to add to this? Yeah, some form of vertical movement. And if we have this progressive climb upward, this spiral or this spin plus the climb is going to make a spiral, right? So I could take this same sphere. I already have a couple of keyframes on here. I could just go to my translate Y. I'm going to go ahead and just pull this up a little bit. And you're seeing it's already cycling with the offset, and so I kind of have control now at how quickly I want this to climb. Set that to linear so I don't get that ease there. Right? And all I have to do is change this height, right? And I change how fast it climbs progressively, right? If I change it to there, then it's going to get all the way to the top in about 2 spins, right? But if I pull this down more, right, it's going to take way more spins to get to the top. Okay. So really all this is just thinking in terms of solving problems, right? What is the problem I need to solve? What is going to be the easiest way for me to solve it? Just like going and getting a glass of milk. However, your art director was unclear when they said, make this ball spiral around this pole. What they really meant was, oh, we need 2 of them, and they need to be on opposite sides, right? We need 2 of these balls spiraling around this pole. And so you're like, oh, okay, I guess I could just do that process again. You can, and that's not that long, but let's think of a little bit of a faster, smarter way of doing it, right? So we got this sphere. I can hit Control D to duplicate that sphere. And so I have another sphere, but it just stays in place, right? It doesn't have any animation on it. What I want to do is I want to duplicate this sphere with the animation intact. So that's a special kind of duplication. If I go to Edit, Duplicate Special, choose this options box, I have to check Duplicate Input Graph right there. Okay? And if I do that, Duplicate Special, now I have both balls doing the same thing, right? One of the ways I can change this though, my rotate, this thing that cycles forever, right? It is currently starting and stopping at the same spot. If I want to be at the mirror across from that, I could just raise or lower these points here, right? So I can get it down to about halfway there, and now we get 2 of them spiraling up, right? Let's be more precise on this. I want this to be at -180, because I know that that's half of 360, and I want this to be at +180. And so now, let's do that, 180, there we go. And so now I have this like perfect mirror of that same animation climbing, right? So you take it to your art director again. You're like, look, I did that thing you told me to do. And the art director said, but the pole I want it to spiral up isn't straight. It's like a curved pole. Like you need to do it on a curved pole, right? So this is one of the reasons I show you these tools is because what your art director comes back, like the feedback they tell you is going to be, I need it to look this way. I need a glass of milk, right? How you solve that can either be these slow, meticulous, painstaking, like difficult way, or you could try to come up with a faster, smarter solution, right? So let's go ahead and make this pole have like a warp in it, right? Let's go ahead and grab this. I got my front view. Grab some vertices. Hit B to soften that. Make that soften a little bit bigger. Move it, right? Let's say this is the pole he really wanted it to spiral up. So now that's a little bit more of a complicated scenario, right? It's going through the pole, which isn't helpful. Now, some of you are probably thinking of solutions for this, right? We could go in and add just another keyframe to make it move, but this thing's cycling forever, so I'm going to break my cycle if I do that, right? If I go to here and I set a keyframe on these objects, like right here, move it over to here, hit S. Well, now what I'm going to get is them spiraling off into infinity, right? Which means I could go back here and I could manually move them back, I guess, around frame 80, right? And I'm getting like pretty much what I need. There's nothing wrong with that. But I just want to think of some other solutions here, right? There has to be other ways of doing this. So what I'm going to introduce you to now is animation layers. Just like in Photoshop, when we learned layers in Photoshop, they made sense, right? They look like a transparency you're laying on top of something else. Then we came to Maya, and we learned that layers don't work that way in Maya. Like if you put something in a layer in Maya, it's kind of like just a way of turning it on and off, hiding it or freezing it, right? Animation layers work a little bit more like that transparency layer. It just does that for motion, right? So here's what how we have to look at this. If I go to the animation layer tab, it's right next to the display layers, right? These two objects currently have a set of keyframes on them, right? When I add an animation layer, it's going to create an entirely new animation graph editor, right, that has no keyframes on it. And I can add animation to that layer, and it will apply it to the motion. So it's kind of like blending both of those layers together, right? If I have a character jumping up and down in one layer, and then I make another layer where the character is just moving forward, if we're playing both of those at the same time, the character will be jumping up and down and moving forward, right? It's additive. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and make an animation layer with these two balls. So whatever it is you need to animate, select them both, right? Or select all of them. And then I can just click this button right here, which is going to create a new layer, but it's going to add the objects I have selected to that layer. Now you'll see that when I click that, it actually made two layers. Because until I started using animation layers, there wasn't even a reason to worry about it. So what it did is it put my original animation in base animation, and it put my new animation, which I haven't done anything with, in animation layer 1, right? So I can double click on this. We'll call this crooked, let's call this curve, right? And you'll see that when I have curve selected, even though my objects are selected and moving, there's no keyframes on my timeline, right? There are currently no keyframes in this layer. So all the keyframes I set in this are going to be in addition to that entire animation that is below it, right? So I'm all right with where it is at the beginning. I'm going to go ahead and hit S, right? I'm all right with where it is at the end. So I'm going to go ahead and hit S. It's in the middle that it's messed up. It's right here, right? So for these, I'm just going to move it over here, right? And you'll actually see that the only thing now in my animation layers is my translate X going from one side to the other. And we're going to get that. It's going to be additive. It's going to add that motion onto my original motion, okay? So animation layers are good for correcting. They're good for layering additional motion on there, right? So let's say, for an example, you have your character. Let's say you have an animation where your character waves, right? And you need to reuse that later when that character is going to be waving nervously and you want like a little tremble in their hand, right? You could just do one animation that has tremble and reuse that previous animation of the wave to get that tremble, right? And it's really about being able to reuse stuff and about being able to like appropriate different animations for different uses. So the cool thing about this is at any point I can turn that off. I can mute that layer, and that curve layer that I added is not doing anything to it. Also on top of that, I can blend this, right? I can blend the weight, right? Let's say my art director came back later and said, you know what, it doesn't need to go that far over. Let's just do like 75% of that. I can pull this back and make it not go as far over, right? In fact, you can do this as a corrective single key. Now, at any point, let's say you're finished with this and you're like, that's what I need, this is the final animation. I can grab both of these layers, right click and say merge layers. I usually go to my options box and I choose this smart bake because I just get a better result with that, and hit merge. And what it's going to do is it's going to bake down my entire animation onto one layer. Right? So now all of those keys are on one layer, and it's got a combination of the moving up and down and the rotation and everything else we need in there, right? Yes?
So if you're using animation layers, and just what comes to mind is something like the game set project, if you need one of them kind of merged with another, can you merge them and keep them both intact at the same time?
Yeah, you don't have to merge them down. You can leave them in there as long as you want. I think what happens is when you bake out something for a video game, it bakes out the location and exports one set of curves for whatever layers you have turned on.
Okay, so it's kind of just taking what's turned on instead of you having to merge them.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, you're welcome to merge them, but yeah. So let me show you a couple other things here. I want to go ahead and actually, it's interesting you bring that up because that's what I'm actually going to open right now is a character animation. So I'm going to go ahead and set my project to a folder I have up on the network. So it's the game. If you haven't taken character animation, it's from that class. So I have a run cycle in here. Do I have a better one than the one I used last class period? Date modified. No, apparently that's it. That's my newest one. All right, open. So there we go. I'm going to say show none, turn on my curves, turn on my polygons, hit 6 so you can see this dude. And so here is a run cycle that I made for the character class. It's not polished by any means, these are just the key poses, right? But let's say you do this animation and your art director, animation director says, oh, but he's supposed to feel more cautious going into this. Like he should be more defensive in this run. This just feels like a vanilla run, right? So maybe having him more like, leaning in with one shoulder and like kind of, squatted a little bit, right? So you go back to your desk, and we can actually fix that for the most part with like one keyframe, right? So let me show you how to do that. So again, I'm going to select all of my characters' controls. Under my animation layers, I'm going to add a new layer. So we got my base animation. I'll call this pose 1, right? So this is my correction pose. Anywhere in here, I can go and make a single pose change and it will sort of distort the entire animation underneath it. So I can go to frame 9. This is a good one to test it. Hit S. I got auto key on, right? And so this is one keyframe. I can go in here now and start adjusting this pose, maybe lean him in a little bit. Maybe I don't want him like that high off the ground through all of this, so I can lower him down some more. Maybe lean him in here more. So again, I'm kind of curling him back like this to feel more defensive. Get this arm out here in front of him. A little bit more like this. Get this arm maybe a little bit back behind him, a little bit more like this. To me, his weight's a little off, maybe a little bit like that. All I'm doing is just setting one keyframe on this, right? I'm not making any changes to the animation. And with that one keyframe, yeah, it's perfect. That's going a little high, right? So you'll see at my loop point there, that's not very helpful. So maybe that needs to be this. All right, that's fine. So I can go back in here on a couple of keyframes. I think this is actually the rig messing up more than anything. Because you're seeing a lot of other little things that are kind of breaking there. So I can kind of do like that. Just kind of adjusting it. May have actually been more in this than anything. So again, set a keyframe on everything there. So really with just these 3 keyframes, I think it's a 20 frame cycle. I can copy that one, paste it out here on frame 20. And so it's closer. I still got some little things to work out, just a few little keyframes to keep that down. I actually think this is a gimbal issue, not actually an animation issue on this. Let's see what that looks like. Oh, so I never set this to cycle on this, so I'll just go ahead and turn this back to 20. So we'll see that. So it's got that one little arm hitch right there. I can sort of calm that down just a little bit. Part of it's right there. Like it just goes completely straight there. Let's keep him kind of curled in a little bit more. So just these really subtle changes. I still got that weird arm hitch. I actually think that there's a gimbal issue because you can see how the curves sort of shift up there. So let me actually fix that really quick. It's on my base animation. Oh, what's animation? Curve, Euler filter. There we go. Should have just ran that one first. Yeah, that'll work though. So using just a couple of poses, I'm able to change this entire animation. This is something you use a lot in the industry. Like why start with the contact pose for every cycle you're ever going to use, right? A sort of a secret is that a lot of the run cycles you'll see in games are all based off of sort of a base run cycle that you sort of adapt and appropriate, unless it needs to have a very distinct look to it, right? Now again, once we're done with all of this, we can bake all of this down. I'm going to go ahead and do this really quickly just to show you some stuff. Selecting all of these characters' controls. merge those layers, Smart Bake. So again, now we have all those controls on there, right? And you can see that like it's dense, but it's not like a mess, right? So that kind of brings up motion capture. Now in this class, you probably are not going to have a ton of motion capture work, but the methods in which you use to deal with motion capture are similar to using these animation layers. In fact, animation layers is one of the ways that a lot of people do that. So I have them all selected. If I hit modify, hit edit, keys, bake simulation, this is what motion capture data looks like, which is a keyframe on every curve for every frame, right? And that's not that bad until you go look at like your characters translate up and down here, right? And that's the character's hips, right? There's a couple of things that will help you deal with dense curve data a little more efficiently. So one of them is actually just in the Move tool. If I select all these curves like this and go to Edit, Transformation Tools, and this Move Keys tool, and choose my options box, you'll see that by default, constant is how this motion is set up, which means if I start moving this, all of them move together, right? However, I can change this to linear, and then if I move this endpoint, my curves will kind of adapt to follow that whole thing, right? So we get this like fall off of a motion instead of a single motion, right? So if I want my character to start low and end high, I can kind of use this to do that, right? I can sort of start him really low, and then as he runs, he's way too low, he gets higher and higher, right? So that's a quick way that I can deal with all of that keyframe data. The other thing that is big in helping with this, though, is just the layers editor, right? Just animation layers is how most people end up adapting motion capture and cleaning up motion capture. So that means that like if you need to make your character have a major shift overall, you can do that with a few keyframes instead of editing this really dense keyframe data. The interesting thing about motion capture, as much as it's not particularly exciting to work on motion capture, more than likely you're going to have to someday anyway. The reason for that is like right now, every project you make, you're making with the mindset that you need to make something that represents you so you can get a job, right? Once you get a job, that stops being your goal. The thing that starts being your goal is not getting fired. Or at least like doing a good job, right? Like hopefully you have a job where you're proud of the work you're doing. And that means you have to get the product out the door, right? You have a game due date, like you're going to hit art lock on, November 1st. And so everything has to be in the game by November 1st. And so if it's not, that game doesn't ship and yeah, you do get fired or the company shuts down, right? It's a big deal. And so suddenly when you have 5,000 animations to get done, cleaning up some motion capture for 2,000 of those seems like a good idea, right? It's like you just need to get them all in the can so the game can get finished. By the end of that, you can pick through the rubble and find the 3 or 4 animations you put in your demo reel. But your day-to-day concerns is getting the project done, right? And so that's why motion capture cleanup, yeah, it's not an ideal, it's not ever anybody's favorite part, right? I mean, that may be completely wrong on that, but it's usually not anybody's favorite part. But it is something that, like, learning some of these tools to leverage them makes you a more valuable artist. If you can clean up 30 animations and motion capture in one day, that saves you more time for the stuff you get to keyframe, right? Okay, I'm going to show you one more thing, and that is animation reuse. So I'm going to make a quick little new scene here. And this is something that I am actually recently starting to work with a little bit more. So I'm going to create a box, because I always create a box. Go ahead and move it up here. I'm going to duplicate this box. I'm going to make a little arm for it on the top. So think of this as like a turret or something like that. Right? This is the little gun handle. But this is like something out of Portal, so it's got a personality. Insert. This is where I want my pivot point to be, somewhere down here, right? And I'm just going to go ahead and modify, freeze transformations, edit, delete by type, history, right? And I'll go ahead and put p cube 2 under p cube 1, and that just means everything goes with it, right? So you remember in Animation Fundamentals when I gave you that arrow and I had you navigate it through all of those little loops? Y'all remember that one? Usually nobody's favorite part. We're going to use some of those tools again, though. What was the key we were using for that, or the tool we were using for that? Do you remember? It was the graph editor. Like there was a tool inside of the graph editor. Yeah, so it was the add key tool, right? So let's go ahead and just set 2 keyframes on here. Let's see how long I want this to be. So probably about 65 frames. Let's try that. No, 65. So I'm going to go ahead and set a keyframe at the beginning and the end of this. So select that, S, and I'm going to wipe out all of the keys. I'm just going to, I'm going to wipe out all of the keys except for translate Y, right? So translate Y is my up and down, and I just want to think about that right now, okay? So you remember when you were a kid and or maybe still yet, and you're playing with like action figures or dolls or whatever, and they were talking and they would talk like this, and you'd be like, "You're never gonna get away with this, Skeletor," and he's like, "Ha ha ha, I will," right? You remember that? Like, you didn't do that? You all need to do that. Like, go home now and do that. Like, that's how we would animate. And whenever your character would talk, it would move these like motions, right? And that's because we kind of innately think about that. Like, and we kind of do that too. Like, if you're accenting something, you'll do like a bigger body motion with it, right? And it's kind of an intensity thing. So I'm just going to animate that. I'm going to animate my character sort of popping up and then sort of popping back down, right? It's like it heard something, it popped up to look around for it, and then it pops back down. And I'm just going to do that on my translate Y. So I usually set this to curves, weighted tangents. It's my keys, add key tool. So if I select the curve, I can just middle click to add these wherever I want to. So I want it to sort of pop down a little bit for some anticipation right here. Oh, that's way too far. And then I want it to pop up kind of quickly here. I want it to overshoot and then kind of settle down. Right? So we'll do something like that. Right? So that's the anticipation down. When it sort of hovers there, and then I want it to sort of dip back down again, sort of overshoot that, and then settle to a stop, right? So a little bit of something like this. And so if we watch this on my translate Y, so it's kind of small, right? How do I make that bigger? So I can scale it up. I can do that a few frames at a time if I want to, right? I can, the monitor stopped working. Okay, there it goes. I can just grab these keys, right, and just move them up if I wanted to exaggerate it. I still have that. That happened the last time too. Transformation tools, move tools, set that back to constant. So I could just grab these keys and slide it up and down and make that bigger, right? I could also grab all of these keys and scale them though. If I hit R for scale and I middle click from the middle here, it will scale that motion up and down as big as I want it to be. Okay? So remember that we can scale this stuff. We can do a lot of stuff. I could scale it the opposite way if I wanted to, right? If I wanted to go in here and scale this curve to be completely inverse of this, look what we get out of that. All right, so it's kind of the backwards, like it's dipping down, right? So here's the cool thing about this. That curve is just a bunch of data. Right? That curve is just a bunch of changing numbers. That means I can hook those changing numbers into any other value in mind, right? And that's where this becomes very easy to leverage, right? So let's say I wanted to add some rotation on this. I wanted to add some rotation on the Y, right? I'm going to go back in here. I'm going to hit S on my first keyframe just so I have something, right? And then I'm going to copy all of these curves on my translate Y. You have to do this in the graph editor because if you hit copy while you're out here in the viewport, it'll copy the objects. So I'm going to select all these, Control C, right? And then I'm going to go to my rotate Z, and with my curve on frame 1, Control V, right? So now I get a little bit of rotation on that. Can you see that? But of course, rotation is based off of degrees, not off of like units. So I need to scale that up. So I can scale that up really big. Get that. So I just used that one curve to generate some rotation out of this, right? Now this is missing the thing that a lot of animation is missing sort of on the in the student level, which is overlapping action, right? We need to start making this feel looser. And a lot of times we think of overlapping action as being one object at a time, right? But it can be one channel at a time. My rotation can precede or follow my motion. So if I go in here and grab these curves and have them happen 2 frames earlier, 2, this is the animation we get out of it. So it's got a lot more of a loose feel to it, right? We can continue pushing that even more, right? So it really just depends on what you're going for. Or I could have those all happen 2 frames later, or even 3 frames later. What's that look like? I think I went one too far. Let's go back one. There we go. So let's take that a step further. What if I wanted this to squash and stretch a little bit, right? I have the curve for it right here. Control C. I'm going to put this on my scale, I guess my scale Y. Now this is going to break a little bit. So right here, Control V. What it has a tendency to do is shift my first key down to 0, and I don't really want it to do that. So what I can also do is sort of go out here, Control V, paste it like that, and then delete that key and sort of bring it back a few frames. Make sure that this one kind of ends on 1 as well. And so again, this is way big. I'll scale that down to something reasonable. And I also kind of want my, that needs to settle at 1, not 2. I also want this curve to kind of hover closer to the 1 range as well. And so really this is still just the same curve. I'm just scaling and doing different things to it, right? Oh, I don't want it scaling in those negative numbers. So.
That's if we can, not if we should.
Yeah. There we go. So that's still feeling a little big to me. We'll just scale the whole thing down a little bit more. Now again, squash and stretch is something that we can offset one way or the other. So I can have that happen a frame or two later or a frame or two earlier, right? Now I know this isn't really squash and stretch, it's actually losing some volume there. And so I would probably also scale it in the inverse to get it looser. Now keep in mind, we can use this on other objects, right? I can use this same curve for my rotate Z, right? I can go in here, grab this curve, Control C, I go in here, I'm gonna go ahead and hit S on my little turret, and my rotate Z, I'll just paste that curve in there. And so I get, wait, what is that? So you're not really seeing it very much. I think I need to scale that up some more. Yeah. So F, scale that up. And you can start to see the animation to it, right? And so we can shift this whole curve. We can do all sorts of different stuff to it here. There we go. So maybe something like that. Now, one of the last few things that kind of, to me, needs a little bit of work, and well, I think this needs some offset too. So we need this to drag like a few frames later. There we go. And then the last thing I would think is like, this is all sort of straight up and down. Like I need a little bit of a curve to the side or something. So I could also take my, what I'm getting on my rotate Z here. I could copy this, put that on my rotate Y. And now I get a big twist right in the middle of it, right? Like I could try it on rotate X too. We'll see what that gives us. Control V. There we go. So, like, recognize I only hit S twice in this entire thing. Like, all of this is just from copying the same curve and reusing it, right? And all of this, again, can still be made even more loose or more whatever just by offsetting it. If I offset my X rotate just by a frame or two, like look what it does to it. So it's really loosening it up, right? So all of this is just some nice little tricks that hopefully you can use to get some animation results. So I want to show you a couple of other really quick things, but it's less of about an animation process and more about a tool. I'm a big endorser of this set of scripts. Has anybody used these before? Animbot tools? Okay. So I'm going to encourage you to look into them while they're still free. These will probably eventually go away. He's in alpha right now. Eventually he'll have an official release, at which point you have to pay for it. And I would pay an embarrassing amount of money for these tools. Like, they are really, really useful. I've already downloaded them. If you need to use them, I have them right here. Or you can get them from right here, but they are also up in DIGM classes, Greg, 3D animation. I put them in resources right here. So it's this Animbot zip file. I'm going to go ahead and copy these to the desktop so I can show you how to use them. I will tell you, it slows down your startup time on Maya because it has to load the scripts, check for updates and stuff like that. But it does actually pretty drastically increase my animation efficiency, particularly with character animation. So I'm going to go ahead and extract this, excuse me, sorry, I've been talking for about 5 hours now, so 6 hours. So once these are extracted, installation is actually pretty easy. Open up this folder. It's this mel file right here. I just have to drag that into Maya. Right? So it's right there. I drag and drop this install file, and it will pop up this like, do you want to install? And I'm like, yep, that's why I dragged it there. So I hit that. It's going to install it. Maybe. There it goes. So yes, that's fine. Close. And so this is the set of tools. A lot of stuff is kind of hidden in here. If you mouse over different features, it will pop up and kind of tell you how these tools work. I originally downloaded it just for this tool, the tweener. And so some of you have probably seen this in posing, right? In fact, let's open up a character. That might be the easiest way of showing you this. Open scene. I'll go back and open up that. Let's do punch. What is this? So I have an animation of a character punching. Let's see how good that works. Time editor, I don't want that. What's that? There we go. Graph editor. That. So for this, I have my rig controls, and I just had a few poses here, right? Man, those curves look messy. Let's grab those. There we go. There we go. Let's delete a couple of these. We got here, we got there. Just delete these two. So where this actually becomes a really useful tool, I have my anticipation, I have my punch pose, right? It's for in between there, because that's very weak looking, right? This pose is not a very strong one, right? And so one of the things you can do is use this tweener tool to sort of set a keyframe in between that either, wow, that's working perfect. Oh, it's because I have them all selected. I'm sorry. I have to deselect all of the curves here. So I use this tweener tool, and you can see that I can sort of favor the previous pose or the next pose. Right? Depending on where I'm at, I can either favor this one or this one with my breakdown, right? Which what that allows me to do is start favoring different parts, right? So if I want my character's hips to get there first, right, I can get there. And then I can start adjusting this, right? I can put some drag here, put some drag here, and I can start just sort of adjusting my pose to have a better arc. Maybe with this curve, I want it to be closer to the end pose, right? So he's already most of the way there. And so you get like this breakdown instead of that boring breakdown we had before. So it's just going to get you part of the way there. I wanted to show you a couple of other little things in here that are really handy. So for example, one of them is the ability to add more or less detail to these curves. So if I wanted to make this curve have more detail to it, I could go in here and, sorry, it's right here. I have the option to add, either simplify it or bake it. Right? So simplify means it's going to try to reduce the keys as much as I can. Bake it means it's going to add more keys to it. So if I start baking it, I can get a key all the way up to every frame, right? You may not need that unless you're really going to do some interesting stuff with it. Like this arm, if I wanted to make that arm jiggle, I could then grab all of those keyframes and I could add either some noise or wave to this, right? So if I create noise, I can just start adding like a little bit of deformation to all of this, right? And then the really cool part of all of this is this ease tool. Let me go ahead and minimize this back down so we can see it again. The EA one, if I need to blend into this, let me go ahead and set all of these to auto. If I needed to blend all of these keyframes into this one, I can ease that up or ease that out, right? So I can ease whole selections of keyframes into a single pose, right? And so this allows me to kind of quickly adjust my easing on this for whole sections of keys. A couple of other tools that are in here that are really nice. One is this tool right here, which allows you to make selection sets. If I go in here and select all of the character's controls, I can quickly make a selection set called all. Okay. Trust me, it works. It's wanting me to get the temporary license. I've already gotten it like 12 times for different computers. But that is going to create a series of buttons that you can just click to install it. And then the other thing that I think is pretty cool is we have this much better, much more improved arc tracker. So if I click this key right here, it's going to develop an arc track for this that looks a little bit better than what we were getting in previous versions of Maya. And the really cool part of this, yes, I'm going to, is you can arc track a single vertex. So let's say I needed to track this character's tip of his nose. I can choose a vertex at the end of his nose here, right? And click this button, and it will create an arc for that entire thing. Okay. So there's just a lot of really cool tools in here. This isn't the only cool set of plugins that I would recommend you checking out. I think what I'm trying to show you here is that there are methods in which you can optimize some of the complicated things you're trying to do, okay? So consider that as a way of maybe expediting some of this motion, making stuff a little bit more simple on yourself. So any questions on any of this? All right, cool. I'm going to go ahead and stop the video. I'll upload it to YouTube, and that way if you have any questions on how to use these, you can always reference that. So, all right, the rest of the class is yours. I'll probably be walking around and checking in on everybody over the next little bit here. Yeah, I want to close it. Closing Maya.